seated in the house. I want to teach and preach on the topic this morning, bringing down the house. Bringing down the house. My Asbury family, as I look at the many notables that make black history what it is, I see the many of our ancestors who wore many hats throughout time. We've been peacemakers. We've been inventors. We've been politicians, athletes, and even educators. But the ones who truly stand out to me are the revolutionaries. These are the ones who may not have used peace as the main option to make a great change, but a great change was made nonetheless. Individuals who use their intelligence, their spirituality, and even brute force to free our people from the oppression that faced them. I'm thinking about individuals like Nat Turner. He was a man who was a slave in Southampton, Virginia in 1831, who stood apart as a brilliant minister and an angry slave. He sparked the first violent slave revolt. He led dozens of slaves in killing over 50 slave owners and was the first physical threat against slavery. Although months after his attack, the slave masters killed Nat Turner, it was his slave revolt that sparked many others after him and began a slave revolution, bringing down the oppressive and economic powerhouse of American slavery. There's also African-American intellectual and businessman David Walker, who wrote David Walker's Appeal. In this writing piece, he brought down the house of racial ignorance in 1848 by writing a piece that encouraged a revolution based on civil liberties and the desire for all men and women to be equal. This businessman turned freedom fighter wrote a small pamphlet that would circulate across the South, scaring slave owners and intellectually empowering slaves to know they must stand up for themselves. He was bringing down the house. And let's not forget our dear sister, Harriet Tubman. Before being recognized as an abolitionist, author, and the first black woman to be on a postage stamp, she was known as a female radical who freed many slaves through the world-famous Underground Railroad. She led over 200 slaves into free northern states out of the plantations of the South. She was so bad that she was known to kill slaves who tried to go back to the master's plantation instead of running for their own freedom. This just lets me know, Asbury, when God frees you from a situation, don't you dare turn back to where God has delivered you from, because it just might kill you. She didn't wait for any man to assist her. She would do many of these rescue missions by herself. She was bringing down the house of ignorance and sexism in our nation before it even had a label. And that is why we got to remember, people of God, examples like these in the past, because even in the present, there are certain things in the house that must come down. As they brought down slavery, sexism, bigotry, and internal as well as external racism, we must bring down so much more of the same today. We have to bring down a type of sexism that tries to influence our daughters to be video vixens, side pieces, and not the main attraction to a man's heart. Let our daughters know, yes, they are made for greater. They are no gender-specific jobs, and yes, they can become who they want to become, and not what television tells them to be. We have to bring down the house. We have to bring down a hidden racism that still lingers in our society. Although we don't see white sheets and burning crosses, we can still see the lines on the map that create new zones that keep others out and only allow a select few in. We may not be separated by laws on the books, but we are separated by zip codes on our streets. A change must be made. Oh yes, we are bringing down the house. I'm declaring this morning, people of God, it's time for the house to come down. It's been up and running for far too long, getting God's people away from where they need to be. It's time for the house to come down. What house, Pastor? Oh, well, it's the house of private sin, the house of addiction, houses that celebrate ignorance and not lift up the intellectualism of our people, houses that attempt to stop our progress. We can't ignore them any longer. I'm here this morning to declare that the house needs to come down. Today, the houses that are anti who we are in God, the things that have taken up too much space and time already, must come down. By the power of God, we're bringing down the house. Yes. We got to admit this morning, there are some houses we should have never been in to begin with. There are some places we should have never entered. And that's why I'm asking God to bring it all down. Get me out of it. Deliver me from it. And bring it down. Don't you know this was the life of Samson? A man who found himself in the wrong house. Needed God to deliver him at the same time. Bring the house down. I encourage you this morning in your private moments, Asbury, to read Judges chapters 13 through 16 in its entirety to get the full view of Samson's life. His life was a very interesting one. Samson, whose name means man of the sun, had a hero's rap sheet. He was the original gangster. He killed a lion with his bare hands. He didn't even need a gun. He used jawbones of dead animals to kill thousands of men. He was loved by his God and his people, the Israelites. He was feared by his enemies, the Philistines. That's Samson. Amen. Let me tell you the backdrop of this brother named Samson. You see, by the time we meet up with him in the text, God was actually working on his people, the Israelites. This included Samson. You see, over and over again, the Israelites would do evil in the eyesight of God. Then God would put his people, the Israelites, in the hands of their oppressors. The Israelites would cry out unto God, and God would indeed deliver them through a deliverer. The deliverer, through God's power, would save the Israelites, and the people would have a spiritual focus as long as the leader, as long as the deliverer was yet alive. But when that leader made the great transition into glory, the cycle of disobedience and erratic behavior would rise yet again in God's people. So this time, God did something different. Before God brings down the house of the enemies of his children, God must first bring down the arrogance of his children. He noticed the Israelites depended on him for deliverance, but they did not learn from their mistakes, and so God had to bring them down a notch. Oh, people of God, I dare to believe God is bringing us down off our high horses this morning. Before God does anything to our enemies, God must do something with us first. Before he raises us to a new place, before we go higher and higher, he must know if we are humble enough to take the trip. We have to hear his voice loud and clear. He has to see if we can fully rely on him and not to our own understanding. God wants to see if we can go where he'll take us. That's why he said in 2 Chronicles, if my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin and heal their land. Will you go where God tells you to go? Will you follow God? Jesus already taught you in the book of John, he who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He wants to do it for you, and he's working on your house first. Yes. And that's where we find Samson. He was, unfortunately, working his way into the wrong house. Yes, Samson was strong. He had the strength of more than 100 men. But like many heroes, Samson had a weakness. His weakness was women. I'm not saying he was a player, but he loved some women. I'm not putting out all his business, but I'm just letting you know Samson loved some women. He didn't want to marry them. He wasn't trying to pray for them. He wasn't trying to be the best man he could be, but he just loved some women. If you don't get the picture, all I'm saying is that Samson loved to have sex with women. In chapter 14, we are taught that he did have a wife, but it was the wrong wife. So many of us in this house can testify that you can be with somebody, but it can be the wrong somebody. She was a Philistine. She was the wrong person for Samson. She ended up dying in a house fire because she couldn't reveal the source of Samson's strength. The next woman recorded in the text was a harlot at the top of chapter 16. She was a harlot, or as some text says, a prostitute. She simply was there to give him pleasure. And then in chapter 16, verse 4, Samson met up with the infamous Delilah. She has everything he wanted, but nothing that he needed. And because he let his lust get ahead of him, in the end, his physical strength was overcome by his sinful desires. Samson was so preoccupied by what he wanted and not what God wanted for his life. But Samson walked into the house of his enemy. Oh, this just lets me know, Asbury, don't let your weakness cause your death. Samson didn't go down because the enemy caught him. But Samson went down because he handed the enemy his gifts. But learn how to protect your gifts, Asbury. Don't have it for your entertainment. It's not there for your enjoyment, but it's there for you to lift up the name of the Lord. Samson, as a servant of God, enabled his gifts to be pimped. Yeah, he got pimped big time, taken advantage of by the people. But guess what? He pimped his own gift first. Listen, when you show off the gifts God gave you to get the attention of somebody else, you've already given the go-ahead for other people to take advantage of you. Don't pimp your own gifts. Before anybody else came into the picture, before he was set up by his enemies, Samson set himself up first. He got the attention of women because of his strength. He got the respect of the Israelites when he showed off his strength. He thought it was the key to success, but in a real sense, it set him up for spiritual failure. Yes, he had physical strength. He was strong for days, but Samson lost the purpose behind his power.